It's not possible to overstate the power of relationships. We just touched on a few things here.
I always wanted to create a place that I want to work, right? I spent a ton of time there.
Hey Restorers, thanks for checking out a fresh episode of the Restoration Masterclass on Power Skills. This is season 3 of the Restoration Masterclass. It is sponsored by AnswerForce this year. Mandy Ruiz is my co-host on these. She's doing some interviews herself. I'm doing some interviews myself. We're co-hosting some of them. It's kind of a mix of everything. So this one, I'm excited to be here by myself as the host, but I'm excited to be joined by another person who hosts podcasts, Hayden Lee. He is the fulfillment manager at Spot On Solutions, which is a digital marketing company. They are kind of the powerhouse behind all of the CNR website and all of that, and a company that I've had a very long-standing relationship with. And Hayden has done a really great job of getting their podcast going. You're well over 100 episodes now, I think, and leading these conversations. And so in the conversation of power skills, I thought that Hayden would be a great person to talk to about what it's like to effectively lead and listen in conversations and what that kind of power skill can look like. I know a lot of people are thinking about launching their own podcasts, or could just in general use some advice on like, how do you have fruitful conversations with people and keep the questions going and stay engaged and all of that. So Hayden, thank you so much for being here. I am going to toss it over to you to have you kind of introduce yourself and share a little bit about SOS.
Yeah, of course. Thanks again, Michelle. This is awesome. I haven't been interviewed very often, but I do a lot of interviewing, so it's fun to be on the other side of this. But yeah, like you mentioned, I'm the fulfillment manager here at Spot On Solutions. So I manage a team that really kind of our focus is digital marketing and helping people grow their business. We work very closely with you guys over at CNR, and we've loved working with you, as well as a handful of other affiliates in the industry. And then we have a little over 200 clients in the restoration industry all over the country. So that's kind of what I do day to day. And then kind of one of my favorite parts of my job is I get to host a podcast. So we have a podcast called the Success Elevated Podcast. We started it a little over 2 years ago. And I think, we're at episode like 108, 109, something right there right now. And we've dropped an episode a week for the last couple of years, which has been great. And, one of the cool things that I've always said, and that was kind of the genesis behind the idea of the podcast, is we get a front row seat to some really, really cool people at Spot On Solutions. And so we wanted to kind of share their stories, both inside and outside the restoration industry. So and again, to your other point, talking and asking questions and building relationships is it's a big part of it. So it's one of my favorite parts of my job. It's something that I feel like I really enjoy. I've always enjoyed like meeting new people and talking to them and getting to know them. And so this is a fun thing that I get to do on a weekly basis. So yeah, it's good.
Perfect. Awesome. So how do you, I don't even know where to start with this conversation, but when you're going into podcasts, how do you, prep yourself to know what kind of questions you're going to ask? And do you ever get to a point, I know I get to this point sometimes where you're like, am I going to run out of things to ask? How do I keep moving the conversation forward while actively listening? But let's start with, how do you prepare for a podcast to make sure that you're bringing a good interview topics in?
Yeah. So, great question. So as far as preparing goes, thankfully I have a lot of really awesome resources here at Spot On Solutions, but, I know people in the industry. Katie, one of the founders here, knows a lot of people in the industry, so she can give me some background if it's somebody in the restoration space. But if not, I think the biggest thing that I try to do is just do a little bit of homework. I don't try and make the podcast. And again, there are podcasts out there that do a really good job with this, but I try to make ours not so scripted. That's just more of a personal preference than anything else. I feel like the best conversations and the best interviews happen when it's a little more off the cuff. But I still try and have some of the basics down. So I do my homework. I try and get an idea of, okay, who is this person? What industry are they in? Maybe they're starting business. I think of quick shout out, I think, of someone like Tom McCardle, right? He's kind of got this new business that he's starting in the restoration space, and they're getting off the ground. So, I kind of try and maybe learn about what is the problem that he's trying to solve with maybe his new product or his new business. And then from there, I can kind of just spin that into different questions that I want to ask. And that's the biggest thing. So it's really simple to say, do your homework, but
It
what I
is.
try to do is just almost from a personal perspective, be like, okay, what would I really like to learn about this person?
Yep.
And again, I'm kind of a naturally inquisitive person, and so that just kind of makes the prep work is mostly just based off, okay, if
Mhm.
if I were gonna meet this person, get to know them, like what were some questions be that I would want to ask? So
Perfect. Okay,
yeah.
so once you're into the conversation, how do you keep it
Yeah.
flowing and how do you, I apologize for people who can hear this and can tell that I have children in the background at the end of the school
You're
day.
good.
It's great. Real life here. So, how do you put people at ease when you first start the podcast? And I think that this goes into any sort of conversation you're going to have, whether you're having a lunch meeting or a breakfast meeting or meeting somebody over coffee at a trade show or any kind of meeting that you have at all whatsoever. How do you start putting people at ease during the conversation?
Yeah. Um, so what I typically try to do with any conversations, whether it's on the podcast or off, is and this again is probably an oversimplification, but I try to be as genuine as possible. I think that's probably the most crucial thing with any conversation or any relationship is people know when you're being fake. And
They do.
so like it's super easy to catch, right? And so that I try to go into even the podcast, which we typically have some topics we want to cover, and hey, we're talking to Michelle about the state of the industry, like we got to obviously talk about those things, right? But at the core of it, it's I try to be as genuine as possible and be like, okay, how would I maybe I have some genuine questions about what is this topic that we're talking about, right? And as far as how that leads throughout the conversation, I think if you're coming from a place that's genuine and that you actively have a desire to know about this subject or this person, I think the conversation in a lot of ways just kind of comes up on
Yeah.
its own. And to your point initially, when you first kind of brought up the topic, um, a big thing that I've found, and again, it's probably a buzzword that's thrown around a lot in like the interview space or whatever, is you want to be a really good listener. And being an active, people call it, oh, you got to actively listen and all this stuff. It's really just listening, right? Like if
Yeah.
you ask a question, listen to what somebody's answer is, and then maybe build some additional questions off that, like ask, well, how come, or why do you feel that way, or how has that shaped how you think about this, right? Like you can, there's tons of different ways to kind of take that question and or take that answer and talk about other things, but you have to be listening. It's very easy for people to know, okay, I've got these 5 questions that I want to ask. It's very easy for them to be like, well, he's just checking the boxes off on these
Yes.
questions if I just go from question to question to question to question. And so you really have to try to listen and actively be like,
Mhm.
okay, Michelle's answer for this question that I asked was this. Okay, maybe I could, ask her a little bit more about that, or can she clarify, or how does she feel about that? Like it's easy for people to just blow through that and be like, well, what's my next question I got to ask? So
Yep.
that's a crucial piece to it, I think, too.
I agree. I always keep like I always have a pen and like a little notepad and I will
Yeah.
write down
Oh
like
yeah.
one word that they say to help me help jog like my next question because I'm worried when I'm actively listening that I'm going to hear it but then keep listening and forget what that was.
Yeah.
And then I
Yeah.
will be so concentrated on not losing my next question that then I stop listening. It's this whole like internal brain battle. But I found like just jotting down a few words so you can keep listening but go back is super helpful. So
So helpful. Yeah.
have you
That's a big thing.
have you ever what do you do when you have somebody this is hopefully doesn't happen too often in podcasting, but it can help in
Yeah.
networking conversations or business meetings or whatever where you're doing a lot of the asking a lot of the questions and you're getting like one word kind of not great responses and it's
Right.
very hard
Yeah.
to lead a conversation that way and then you kind of feel like you're like pushing almost or like
Mhm.
really you're grasping at straws and you're being too something. I don't know if you have you been in that situation and what do you do when it feels like the conversation's just tough to navigate?
Yeah. So, I'm not a, this is something I've kind of had to train myself up on because I'm not a journalism major by any means. And so I think of like, again, Katie, who's one of the founders here, like has a degree in like journalism and stuff. And so it's very easy for her to kind of come up with those. What I've done, again, if you're like, and you're anything like Hayden and struggle sometimes with those additional follow-up questions to maybe get a little bit more if you're getting just the one word answers, I try and have some questions just kind of in my back pocket, some that I've already mentioned that kind of help you just dig a little bit deeper. So I ask a lot like, how do you feel about that? Or how does that make you feel? Or why do you feel that way? Or, like have some of those quick questions to follow those follow-up questions. Just have some in your back pocket. Obviously, listen. You don't want to just ask somebody how they feel about something if they've just told you how they feel about it. But if you're getting those one word, maybe they're not necessarily telling the whole story, right? Not that they're trying to hide something, but maybe they don't really feel like talking. Have some of those backup questions in your back pocket to just be like, oh, that's interesting. Why do you feel that way? Or did you enjoy that? Right. Like, a common question that everybody does, especially when they're first building relationships, is like, what do you do for work? Or where did you go to school? Or where are you from? Right. Like, it's very simple. Like, where are you from can sometimes be a one word answer. Oh, I'm from Blackfoot, Idaho. Right. And so sometimes you can ask some follow ups. Oh, what was that like? Or did you enjoy living in Blackfoot, Idaho? Right. Like, you can ask some follow ups to that will help get a longer answer than I'm from Blackfoot, So it's have some of those backup questions. If you're anything like me and sometimes struggle with sometimes off the cuff, I
Mhm.
have some of those just small little follow-up questions in my back pocket to just be like, hey, how do you feel about that? Why do you like that? Or what was that like? So there's some things like that and maybe, you memorize those or, 4 or 5 of them. It's pretty simple to just kind of spin those into different versions. But that's what I typically try to do if I get some of those short one word answers.
That is smart. And it gives you time in your brain to regroup and figure out what the next
Mhm.
question is going to be. So I've
Yep.
found with myself, sometimes I just need a minute. Like I need them to talk a little
Yep.
bit longer so I can get my brain formulated to what I'm going to ask next. So,
100%.
yep. Okay. Any other tips and tricks with the art of interviewing that you would recommend to people who are listening, who want to be
Yeah.
better?
So when you kind of told me about this, there was a couple of things that I thought of as I was thinking, okay, how do I interview or how do I build relationships? Because I think the relationships piece is probably even more important to a lot of like our audience, especially in the restoration world where they've got to go out and build a relationship with an insurance adjuster or with a property manager or whatever. And a couple of things stood out, and we've talked about them in a lot of ways. But a couple of tips, I guess, that came to my mind were like, don't have an agenda. Don't necessarily feel like you've always got to cover every
Mm-hmm.
little thing. Don't be too formal. One of the best pieces of advice that I've gotten. We had an insurance agent come on and do an interview on our podcast who's actually my uncle, and he described how he's built a very successful insurance agency with one of my other uncles, and they've grown and are expanding, and they've done a lot of really awesome work. And I asked him, okay, how would you prefer a restoration owner to build a relationship with you? And he's like, get me out of the office. He's like,
Oh,
if you come in with just a plate of cookies and or some pens that have your company's logo on, like that's nice and that's cool, but like I really like to get out of the office, kind of get out of that formal setting. And he's a big golfer, so they'll go play golf or
yep.
whatever. Like, get out of the office, let's go to lunch, let's go do something out where it feels a little less formal and
Mm-hmm.
helps you build a little closer relationship. And I know, from his experience, like some of the most longest lasting relationships he has is because of, building that on a golf course or whatever. So yeah, don't be too formal. Don't have an agenda. And the last kind of piece to this that we got some great advice on the podcast. It was one of our very first episodes. I got some great advice from used to be a client, now kind of a partner with us, is Len Hume, and he talked a little bit about building relationships and his advice on building relationships. And he said, and it's something that stuck with me over the last 2 years: don't go into a relationship, don't go into a conversation asking, how can this person help me?
Mm-hmm.
Go into that relationship saying, how can I help this person?
Yep.
And that's how you build a long lasting relationship. So have the humility to be like, I'm not the coolest person here. I'm not the smartest person here. So why don't I go ask and learn and see, okay, what can I do to help these people? Or what can I do to learn more about them? If you go into conversations and relationships like that versus I'm just going to grill them with these questions. I'm going to tell them exactly what I need to happen. I want to make more money. So this is how I need them to help me. If you go in that way, it's not going to work. But if you go in saying, how can I help this person? How can I learn more about them? And show a little humility there,
Yep.
you will build much more. You'll build more relationships, and they will be much more long lasting. So that's kind of my last tip, I guess, and that's something I stole from Len Hume. He's awesome and gave some great advice, but that's something that's really resonated with me, and I've tried to cultivate that over the last couple of years. So
I love it. And it's always nice to see Len when he's at events. So
oh yeah, he's awesome.
he is awesome. Okay, well, Hayden, thank you so much for all of your insight. I was jotting down different things that I think I should title this as we go based on words that you said. And I don't know, I have
Of
lots of
course.
different ideas at this point. So thank you very much. I feel like this has covered a lot of great topics. And I have
Yeah.
people ask me all the time, I want to start a podcast. Where do I start? Or you're so good at interviewing. How do you do that? And you gave me skills. I had thought of those easy open-ended questions that you
Yeah.
have primed. And that's a really great tip that I'm definitely taking into my own life. I needed that one. So
Well, and you'll probably catch me using them too much in some podcasts, so don't
I
listen
know.
too closely. But it's yeah, those open-ended questions can make all the difference. So yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Hayden. I hope you have an awesome rest of your day. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thanks, Michelle. Appreciate it.